Hello and welcome to the Monday, March 7th, 2011 City Council Informational. We'll call our meeting to order. We'll start off with a point of privilege from Kenny Anderson. Kenny?
Thank you. At last Monday's Land Use Committee meeting, my actions in not voting on a motion resulted in a group of citizens who had patiently waited for their turn to speak be denied. I believe in the right to citizens to have a voice in issues facing our city, and I have worked to protect that right. Last Monday night, I failed in doing that. For that mistake, I wanted to apologize to the members of Build It Downtown, the citizens of Sioux Falls, and my colleagues. In the future, my actions as a council member will reflect on lessons learned from this experience. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Kenny. Very well done. We do have a change of order today in our agenda. We are going to hear first from our City Council Chief of Staff, Deborah A. Owen, but then we're going to move on to our IRS audit and a quick comment from Mark Cotter, and then we'll go to our Land Use Committee update and other council discussions, so be advised of that change. So now we'll move on to our City Council staff report with Deborah A. Owen, City Clerk, Chief of Council Operations.
Thank you, and good afternoon, Sioux Falls City Council. If I could just talk a little bit about the Northwest District City Council vacancy. As you know, Council Member Litz, former Council Member Litz's vacancy has become effective, so the Council will have 30 days by charter to appoint that position. And the office has sent out press releases to garner applications and other information that will be given to the Council at the deadline. But as those applications come in, we'll update our website for those who would want to take a look at those prior to the deadline. In addition to the several forms and the cover letter that is being sent is available on the siouxfalls.org website, or you can also come into the clerk's office and pick up those applications. There's also just to remind everybody about that process in terms of those 30 days that the council has. The deadline for those applicants to submit is the 12th or 12 noon on March 16th. And that will be the final day to submit an application to the council to be considered as a council member for the Northwest District seat. Council will then have a working session on the 24th, about a week from that deadline, to consider and review and pare down those applications to a smaller number, perhaps 3 or 4, who then will move forward to a public forum for the League of Women Voters, who will moderate and hosted also by the Sioux Falls City Council. That will be here at the Carnegie Town Hall at 6:30 p.m. We will have that web streamed at siouxfalls.org and then also on Channel 16. And the public is invited to attend, but also can submit their questions to the League of Women Voters, who will then moderate that forum and ask those questions that are cleared through their sorters. And then finally, Council will take final action on the finalists who will be pared down, and that will be on April 4th at the City Council meeting. Council will vote, and the finalists will then be sworn in to office that night, which will be the day the day, April 5th, I should say, is the last day in that 30-day window. So we really are moving very quickly to get that process done. And we've had some interest this morning already of people picking up applications from our office, so that's exciting to see. And then if there are no questions on that, I was asked by council leadership to kind of give an update in terms of procedural things, a reflection of the Land Use Committee that happened, and to talk a little bit about how we use Robert's Rules, and in some situations where city ordinance specifies if there's a conflict, we'll use the city ordinance. And so there were some questions raised during that time, and I think even afterwards, about how votes are recorded and how all that works. So if you will, I'll just talk first about the motions. In terms of the motion of laying on the table, or to table an item, that's often used as an interrupting. Usually it interrupts pending business. If there's an urgent matter before the council or the governing body, the committee can then take that up. It wouldn't perhaps even be on the agenda, or it could be later on the agenda, and the council would have somebody make a motion to table something to a discussion, if you will, to allow a more important measure or an urgent matter before the council to consider that. And so it's kind of a narrow parameter when we use that motion laid on the table, in part because it almost as if you would take that matter and then leave it with the recording clerk, because it can be brought forward at any point in time without actually being posted. If you notice in Peer, the motion is to defer to the 41st day, in part because there is no 41st day. And so you rarely see that motion in part because it is has a really rare, or really narrow parameter when it can be used. And rather, we would suggest a motion to defer to a date certain, or postpone to a date certain, or postpone to a date indefinitely. And so that you can, differing those two motions to postpone to a date certain or postpone to a date indefinite allows for that motion to be debated. If you are doing a motion to lay it on the table, there's no debate. And so there's no questions that can be answered or clarified about the motion, and that's why that motion is used in a very narrow situation, in part because there's no questions. You immediately move to the vote. And if there's any more questions on that, but hopefully that will help down the road when the council moves forward with an item that you may want to postpone to a different time, perhaps when a report is due, when that might be more advantageous for the council. Anyway, then the second issue that's been raised a lot is the recording of votes when there's a no vote. And generally speaking, first to begin with, when committees take votes, it's often by simply a voice vote. We don't do roll call most of the time in committees, unless, of course, the committee chair would need to clarify the outcome of the vote, and then they may want to do a roll call vote. So just to let the committee chairs know that at times you can specify for a roll call vote. But generally speaking, with Roberts, without being modified by city ordinance, a non-vote is simply not recognized, and so it wouldn't really count as a yes or a no vote. There's only one particular time when a non-vote has the effect of a no vote, and that is when there might be a requirement of something to be adopted by a supermajority of council members. So you may need to have 6 of the 8 votes to be a yes vote to move something forward. In those situations, and this might be confusing, so my apologies, that would have the same effect as a no vote because the motion wouldn't pass without that supermajority vote. Narrow situation again, but very much, so it's really not considered a no vote, if you will. However, in city ordinance, we use Robert's rules unless there's a conflict with city ordinances. And so in section 218, under voting procedure, we do have in subsection B that a member's silence in failing to respond to a roll call shall be recorded as an affirmative vote. And that is where, if you're not abstaining for a conflict of interest, and there is, which is declared, and there is no vote, then that is recorded as a yes vote. And I don't know why that is in ordinance. My sense is we may want to revise that, as I've heard back from council members, to not have your vote be an automatic yes or an automatic no. But that is how that voting procedure occurred. Thank you. Questions?
Questions? Councilor Aguilar.
Deborah, do you know when that ordinance came into being, that
Yes.
where it becomes a yes vote?
You know, it was amended in '99, and I would sense that is the time that was recorded. And it is odd to have that there. You know, we do have the roll call required in all council meetings. We don't have a voice vote in an official council meeting where you're taking action on a particular item. That's always by roll call. And a council member is allowed to pass. During the first roll call, let's say the first 5 members of the council's name is called and the 6th member wants to pass. They're allowed that vote, but when their name is called, then at the end, and there is no response, it is recorded as a yes vote. Roberts does not function that way, though.
So does this ordinance pertain only to city council meetings? Or would it pertain to well, we don't vote in informational usually, but in a committee meeting?
You know, it simply says voting procedure, so I think it's applicable in that we don't specify between the votes in a committee meeting or a council meeting. We've always used that in particular in the city council meetings, and we've never had a situation such as we did where the agenda was modified in a committee meeting. And I think there was just a couple of issues, and I tried to raise that, you know, in terms of moving an item off of the agenda or delaying of a discussion on an agenda item in a committee meeting. I would suggest that postpone to a date certain or postpone to a date indefinite. It allows for discussion. If the committee wants to discuss the item, it allows those committee members who may not have notice of that motion, but allows them to ask questions about what is the outcome of the yes or no vote. And so hopefully that can kind of help settle that. But the other one, council may want to consider revising that ordinance and simply using Robert's rules, the latest version, and not having an automatic yes vote recorded.
Thank you.
If I could add maybe a thought, I would think the affirmative direction, I think, as we discussed, is possibly a way I think in most legislation is directed in an affirmative fashion, and those crafting the legislation would account for the possibility that somebody may not say anything or be there, and if their vote could then be cast in a yes, that would more than likely allow that legislation to move forward, and that's probably some of the method to that end.
It is unusual. We actually did confer with Nancy Sylvester, who I actually think is probably the best in the country in terms of parliamentary procedure, about the yes and the no vote, because it is highly unusual to have it as recorded as a specific yes vote. So Roberts doesn't have the abstaining from a vote doesn't count as a vote. Only in a narrow situation where it could have the effect of a no vote is that used. But that again would, if you have to have a requirement of 6 out of the 8 council members need to approve something, it wouldn't necessarily be a no vote, but it would essentially, a non-vote could count against it have the effect of a no, if you will. Sorry, Robert's just sort of like untangling spaghetti, but it is something that the council may want to consider changing down the road because it does have obvious ramifications of council business.
Maybe as long as we're discussing this, we might just cover real quick the idea if you're at a council meeting and you are in a conflict with an item on the agenda that you need to abstain from voting, that you actually need to remove yourself from the chamber so that your nonverbal response isn't recorded as a yes. It's actually that you've made note that you've had to remove yourself and you are no longer present. And then as well with the, I think in the past there's been a couple of councilors who've used the pass vote. And I'm no Robert's Rules expert here, but I think the pass vote allows you maybe for the rest of the vote to go around the room, but you still need to vote. You cannot pass again and or...
Without the ordinance in place that the city has now in the city code, yes, you would still need to vote. It just allows the opportunity for the person to have more time. And for instance, if, and suggestion, I guess, from staff to council is if, you're uncertain about the motion on the floor, and in particular with the laid on the table motion or to table something, you can always do a point of order, and that gives you some time. That's an interrupting motion. It'll take precedence, and then the chair can confer with the person who is serving as the parliamentarian to determine whether that motion is proper, and it just gives you time, to consider.
Okay, very good. Yes, we should make sure we utilize the city clerks and their knowledge and always slow things down if we need help. Again, we do have a change of order here. If there's no other further questions for Deborah, we do have a change of our agenda to move right on into our presentations with the IRS audit, and then we'll go to Mark Cotter, and then we'll come back to our Land Use Committee report and City Council open discussion. So, Bill O'Toole, welcome.
Good afternoon, City Council. Bill O'Toole, Director of Human Resources. Just real quickly before I introduce the speakers on this topic, in September of 2008, the city received notification from the IRS that they were going to be conducting what's referred to as an IRS 941 audit. And just a brief explanation of what that means. It's basically an employment tax audit. And we appreciate the opportunity to come back and share with you the results of that audit that, again, started in September of 2008, concluded in November of 2010. And when we received the notice from the IRS, one of the first things that we decided to do is to seek competent legal advice and expert financial advice from our auditing firm, Eide Bailly. So today, I'd like to introduce Beth Feichtenberger from Eide Bailly and Chris Fideler from Murphy Goldhammer Pendergrass Law Firm. I think Beth is going to handle the bulk of the presentation. Chris is also going to be available in the event of questions. And without further ado, I'll introduce Beth Feichtenberger from Eide Bailly.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. Thank you for the opportunity to come before you. Just want to briefly go over the results of the exam, why we believe the city was selected, and to some degree put your mind at ease that from our perspective, this turned out about as well as we could have hoped. First of all, the question has kind of been asked, why would the City of Sioux Falls, as a tax-exempt organization, receive notice for an IRS examination? We have, and I'll be honest with you, I've been practicing in public accounting for about 18 years, and this was the first municipality I have seen selected. We asked the agent that question, and although the exact answer is classified, in other words, the IRS does not release information as to why they selected taxpayer for examination, she gave us enough of a clue that we were able to ascertain that it really had nothing more to do with than the IRS is now focusing a division of themselves, which is based out of Fargo, North Dakota, on municipalities. They come in, and instead of looking for opportunities for more income taxes, they're looking at items like worker classification. Should someone be an independent contractor? Should they be an employee? They're looking at 1099s. Were they correctly issued? Were they issued to the people they should have been? And in this case, she initially had one other probe she wanted to start down, which was looking at the use of cell phones. That ended up being tabled because Congress in December of 2009 through legislative action, the U.S. Congress said that personal use of cell phones is not going to be considered anymore a fringe benefit that needs to be tracked or monitored. So that issue came off the table rather quickly. There was nothing glaring, there was nothing alarming, there was nothing going on in the conduct of the city's business that would give rise to the examination. But they are a large enough municipality that they hit the radar of the IRS. And in all honesty, they may come back. She indicated that this division, which solely does municipalities, may come back in 4 or 5 or 6 or 8 years and do this again, just as a follow-up. They also consider themselves to be educational in nature, so she offered herself up to the city as an educational resource and as a person of contact if they had any questions going forward. The question has also been asked, why did it take so long? Why 2 years for an IRS exam? And I can tell you, and I know Chris would back me up on this, that every request that the agent made was very promptly handled by the city staff in the Human Resources Office and by Bill. For whatever reason, though, we have no ability to control the speed of an IRS examination. The IRS is a large bureaucracy, as you know, and they move at their own speed. And there were times that the agent was not heard from for 6 to 8 months on end. So we moved quickly when we were asked. We responded quickly, and therefore this exam took 2 years through no fault of the city or anybody else's here on this end, I believe. The findings were basically, they went through a very, very detailed analysis of the contractual relationships with different people that have with the city. Particularly, they looked at the documentation surrounding the parking ticket, hearing officers, the REMSA director, and the medical director. And the IRS went so far as to hire and had their own internal legal counsel not only look at the documentation, the actual contracts that are in place, but they pulled South Dakota state statute and looked at the wording of our own statute here. And what they found, and what the reason they ruled against us in declaring that in these 3 cases these people needed to be employees and not independent contractors, is they found that the state statute as drafted in South Dakota gives the city the authority or the right to control these people. Whether or not it's exercised is not material. They're given the right or the authority. And under IRS rules, having the right to control someone, even partially gives rise to making that person an employee. So at the end of the day, they only reclassified those positions to employees for the year 2007 only. They left 2008, 2009, 2010 alone. We felt that that was a fairly generous settlement, and that played a big factor in signing the closing agreement. And the closing agreement basically said that the city would agree to reclassify parking ticket hearing officers, the REMSA director, and the medical director, at least for the time being, as employees on a going forward basis. And so the cost to the city of that particular settlement was just shy of $20,000. So again, they left 2008, 2009, 2010 alone. They did not force reclassifications on those years. The other thing that they looked at in detail was reams and reams of paper on what 1099s were issued to people who perform services for the City of Sioux Falls. And considering the city has over 6,500 active vendors, she was able to find 32 cases where the 1099s were not issued and they should have been. I thought that was rather a startlingly low number considering what I've seen in practice, but she did issue a penalty on those, and that penalty amounted to $3,200. The lessons I think that we learned in walking through this examination with her, as well as we did hold a meeting with her manager via telephone, was that it does come down to not really the substance of the relationship, but it comes down to the wording. So much of the wording in state statute and the wording in these documents governs. I think you also need to know that the trend that is happening in this country, particularly with Obamacare in play, is that worker classification will become of paramount importance as we move forward, because health care will now be tied to employment. And so it will be more and more difficult to get people to qualify as independent contractors. And the default classification will largely fall to being an employee. We did learn that the IRS does have a new mechanism if you want to try to rule that someone that's doing services on a regular basis. If you want to try to place them in an independent contractor status, there is a way to get an advance ruling on that. And our advice to the city has been that if somebody falls into that scenario, that they get that advance ruling. It's free of charge, and it takes a few weeks, but it's worthwhile. I also just want to put your mind at ease a little bit that we had several comments from both the agent but particularly her manager, which approves this exam, that the operations of the city were very well run, very organized, and the attention to detail, the protocol that was in place to manage the amount of data that we're managing and deal with this, they were impressed. And while, yes, there was a settlement, and rarely do you walk away from an IRS exam with nothing being paid, I think they made several comments that they thought that this was a well-run operation. That's the gist of what we've learned, what came as a result of this. But I want to give you a few minutes to, if you have any questions, you certainly, if you would bring them forth at this time for either myself or for Mr. Fiedler, we'd be happy to answer them. And if we can't, then maybe Bill can.
Councilor Aguilar.
So what was the total penalty?
The penalty was $3,200. The additional payroll taxes were $19,734.
Thank you.
Councilor Brown.
Sorry, can you again give me the three positions you were talking about with the right to control? What were those positions again?
The positions were parking ticket hearing officers, and do you remember exactly how many people were in that? 2 or 3 were in that category. The REMSA director and the medical director.
Who was the medical director? Okay. And I didn't understand, you said that we were being fined, was it just for 2007?
You're not being fined. What they did was they assessed payroll taxes for 2007 only. The agent was actually would have had the right to reclassify those taxes for 07 and 08 and 09. She could have. But typically, when they find something like that, they give you an opportunity to change what you're doing. And so they made that reclassification for 07 only, left 2008, 09, and 010 alone under agreement by the city to change it.
Got
going
it.
forward.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions? Councilor Rolfing.
So let me get this straight. They come down here from North Dakota, Fargo, and tell us that we've done two things wrong. Hire an attorney to research everything because they can't quite figure it out themselves, and find three things wrong, and we pick up the tab for $20,000, $23,000. That about summed it up?
Well, I think what they were saying was, look, we understand you have documentation in place, but according to the way your own statutes are written, you have the right and the authority to control these people. Therefore, we have the right to reclassify them.
Right.
Yeah, and so to change the nature of the relationship with said persons would require changing probably South Dakota state statute and the underlying documentation that governs that arrangement.
In other words, they probably spent more to get $23,000 than what the $23,000.
Well, they don't have to make money like some
Yeah,
private enterprise
okay,
does. Yes,
okay.
they spent a significant amount of time going through the documentation.
Yeah.
You could tell because their agreements were extensive.
Just thought that might.
Yeah.
Councilor
well,
Anderson.
Just to give everyone an idea, about how many 1099s do the city issue every year? Hundreds, thousands?
I believe in 2010 it was a little over 350
Was it-
issued. They have 6,500 active vendors. I believe you issued about 300. Does that sound right? That's what you emailed.
Yeah, one of the things that I mentioned, or I visited with Tom Huber about before coming over here, is that before I think they got it narrowed down to the 6,500, I think that number may have been double before that. So it's a lot.
So basically, finding 32 out of 6,500 or more, that's pretty good.
Yeah, I think the REMA paper she went through was about like this. So, like I said, it's extremely difficult, and the process they have in place is really very good. It's just a matter of when someone combs through it with a fine-tooth comb, they're going to find something.
Thank you.
Any other questions? All right, very good. Thank you. Thank you very
Thank you.
much. Congratulations to Bill O'Toole, I guess, as well, and his office and others.
It really was a team effort, and I really want to thank Beth and Chris both for their leadership and their professional services in walking us through this rather extensive audit. City Attorney's Office, Finance Department, there are multiple people, so thank
Great.
you.
Okay, now we have Mark Cotter. Mark and I were talking, and he's got some news that he thinks is pretty important for us to know. And he asked if he could come and share it with us, and I thought it'd be appropriate. So, Mark?
Thank you, Councilor, and other council members. Mark Cotter with the Office of Public Works. Have some very good news to share with you today, specifically on sewer. We have bid the two large sanitary sewer projects that, with your support, we accelerated that were originally in the plan for 2012 and 2013. They were bid on February 17th and the 24th. And so I just wanted to recap some of those results and kind of tell you what's next. So essentially, we call those projects segments 5 and 6 of the Central Main. And again, Central Main is the backbone sewer of the City of Sioux Falls. Segments 5 and 6 essentially go from the 11th Street Viaduct on the Big Sioux River all the way south to the Tuthill Lift Station. It's just about 3 miles of sanitary sewer, large diameter. The original estimated project amount was $21.27 million. We have engineering, design, and construction administration contract with our engineer of just over $1 million. And then the bid amounts for the two combined projects is $12,935,000. So it's provided us a significant savings of just over $7 million of bond authority that, with your support, we'd like to move forward with some additional projects in 2011. One of the factors as we looked at the estimates and the bid results is that we've seen significant cost savings in pipe. The pipe came in about $3.6 million less than what we expected to purchase it at, which is fantastic because it's a superior pipe in the industry. And also, the contractors, one of the first line items that you bid is mobilization, and we've seen about a $1.4 million of less of mobilization than what we've tracked with in the past. So, and one of the backhoes actually showed up today on the site, so they're getting ready to get started. Just to recap, Segment 5 goes from the 11th Street Viaduct down to River Boulevard, and that went to H&W Contracting of Sioux Falls at $5.8 million. The expectation is that they will start for sure by April 1st, and so bike trails and some of those preparation activities will start to close so those activities can get underway. And then we expect it to be substantially complete by August 1st to have the pipe in and operational, and then there's be some turf and bike trail completion just shortly after that. Segment 6 went to a contractor called S.J. Lewis Construction out of Rockville, Minnesota. That went for $7.1 million. They've done a significant amount of work in the area as well over the years, and so both very reputable contractors, both significant in size, so they certainly can do the work under the conditions that will be expected. One of the things that we've looked at with once the collapse occurred back on August 4th is that when we started to assess the sewer system, we started to break those projects down into what we call Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3, if you recall. And so our recommendation is to move up some of the Tier 2 projects and accelerate those. They are some of the key lining projects that we're seeing either structural deficiencies in the pipe or we're seeing a lot of infiltration where we're seeing a lot of leaking at the joints and at manholes, so we can really further strengthen the system. And so we were intending to go through a fairly lengthy presentation next week, but I recognize that you have a really busy informational meeting, so we just wanted to get here as soon as we can, tell you the good news, and with your support, we would start the preparation activities to do the additional work.
That was the, just real quick, the relevance of the time was to just to get us involved in this discussion and decision and to keep things moving. If we'd like further details of all this, Mark is prepared to do a presentation further down when our schedule allows. Mm-hmm. But due to the time and the construction seasons that we have, it's just imperative that he gets going if it indeed is the wish of the council to spend that extra money, spend that money in this fashion. And I guess that was the reason for bringing Mark. But Councilor Entenmann.
I do have a couple of questions, Mark, and if you don't have the answers now, I'd appreciate it if you could get them for us.
Okay.
A couple of things. Knowing that the spring thaw is just around the corner, and in lieu of the fact that there's some significant snow up north and we'll probably have some spring rains, I'm just kind of curious as far as what the department expects as far as the water this year that we might see, and do we have any plans? I know we've done I know you've been working on that throughout the winter time, checking how the flows are and stuff like that. The other question I have too is that the plan for the sump pumps, you were doing house-to-house inspections on the sump pumps, and I was just kind of curious as far as what the results of those were, if you're able to mitigate. It's my understanding from your report last year that that had a significant impact on the flows that we were receiving in our storm sewer system, mm-hmm. and our sanitary issues that we were having too. So I'm just kind of curious about some of those so that we can kind of put the public on notice about what our expectations are for the spring, and again, just to reinforce the actions that we've taken to date.
Okay. We'll probably have to come back with some detail, but I think what we've seen from the National Weather Service, and we're fortunate that Skunk Creek is the primary waterway that will actually flow through this project site. Now we do have, with what we alerted you to last week and what National Weather Service is gearing the whole area up, is that there's a lot of snowpack and ice in the Big Sioux River Basin. Our hope is that we can divert most of that around the city and there won't be an impact on the south half in some of our lower areas like Yankton Trail Parks and those areas. But I think right now, if the melt is reasonable and we can divert the Big Sioux River through the diversion channel, right now they're telling us that there's not a lot of moisture in Skunk Creek Basin, and so we'll just pass that through, and the contractors will begin their work. Sump pumps, we have had some good dialogue with targeted neighborhoods. We are talking about strengthening some of the ordinance on the sump pumps, and so we'll bring you both, I think, here in the very near future. We do have some meetings planned with the IRAB board first, and then we'll bring what that discussion is, and then eventually a resolution. So more to come on both those items.
Great, good job.
Councilor Brown.
Just a procedural question. Deborah, since we have budgeted for this and appropriated for this, there's no action the council needs to do legislatively, right? That's what I thought. Okay. Thank you for bringing it, though, Mark. I appreciate hearing it.
You're welcome.
Councilor Aguilar.
Mark, with sections 5 and 6 being two different contractors, do both projects go on at the same time then, and meet in the middle, or what?
They will, and they have targeted completion dates. For example, right now, one of the key areas is to get people in and out of Pasley Park once the ball season starts. So you'll see some of the initial activities that where there's only one way in and one way out of that park, they have to begin, and they've got some targeted completion dates, and if they don't meet them, they'll be paying disincentive fees. And so, but in general, we've coordinated both projects. We've got one engineering team that will oversee the entire project. And so it should be a fairly smooth process. Both these contractors are used to working in some, pretty congested areas, so this actually should be a good project for them. But there is a number. I mean, we start at Drake Springs Park, and we progress to Cherry and Rotary and Pasley and Tutt Hill. I mean, the Parks has been involved with this design from the beginning, and they've been a good partner through the whole process. The next, if I could, just another action that's coming next week is just the allowance that will allow us to apply for the next SRF loan, which is just over $14 million, which would really set us up to go from Tutt Hill back to the west. And just wanted to identify that. Doesn't obligate you to borrow the money, but we do have procedures that we have to you have to grant us the ability to apply for the funds, so that would actually come next week.
Thank you, Mark. Any clarification on that topic that needs to be given? I think it's pretty good news, and it's certainly up to us if we did not want Mark to go ahead with further construction and reduce our bond level. We certainly have that authority, but I think given our state of the sewer system, everybody'd like to see it in good working condition sooner than later.
Go.
Amen.
Go for it. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you very much.
All right, now back to our regular programming. We'll go on to our Land Use Committee update with Councilor Chair Erpenbach.
Thank you, Councilor. I can't get this to move. Excuse me. Yeah, I think I broke it. Thank you, Councilor. I just was trying to bring the microphone closer because I get accused of not speaking clearly enough into it. Just reporting on last week's land use agenda and the actions that were taken. Just real briefly, the things that that we did hear about and that we did talk about. We first of all started with, and I had someone remind me that there will always be people with RV parking concerns, but the gentleman that I invited to attend that meeting last week had a specific concern about an odd-shaped lot. And I wanted, our goal really for that meeting was to start talking about land use in sort of more general, more broad terms, in terms of what is it that the Land Use Committee is about and where are we headed with it. And so in order to start that conversation, we really did start with the ground level of an individual property owner with a weird-shaped lot, and we really had a long conversation with him and eventually hooked him up with city staff with planning and zoning so that he could be a little better served on a personal level. And then we kind of moved forward with, we asked Mike Cooper and Jeff Schmidt to talk about the zoning amendment process. Jeff walked us through that Shape Sioux Falls 2035 process that has been going on for several years, and now they're actually rebuilding the zoning ordinances that are from 1983, and we're going to continue to see updates from that particular process because it's going to take us another couple of years to get to that point where citizen input and all of the things that are involved with rewriting ordinances are finalized. And then the third thing on the agenda was to do a little more in terms of visioning conversation. I brought in Darren Smith and Erica Beck from Community Development to talk about the things that they sort of have in their toolbox for economic development. And they talked a lot about downtown, a lot about some of the things, the incentives and things that we have as opportunities for citizens and for businesses in Sioux Falls. And really that was the beginning of our intention was, again, to start to vision about what it is that the Land Use Committee is going to be about. The fourth item on the agenda then was actually the Build It Downtown Committee, and they were invited by the chair of the committee to talk about their vision, their dream for things that could happen downtown. Yes, right now they support an event center downtown, but the presentation that they handed out to us and were unable to present shows some real dreams about possibilities for things that could happen in Sioux Falls and downtown. And I think the point was, and I want to end this on a positive note because I want people to understand that that agenda was built for a purpose, that if we don't listen to all of the pieces and all of the players in a conversation, especially about things like community development and economic development. We had ended the 4 o'clock of the informational meeting with a whole procedure or a whole presentation on the economic development process and workshop that Councilors Aguilar and Anderson and I went to. And this Land Use Committee meeting then sort of dovetailed into that in terms of conversations about bringing more people to the table, conversations about not just the leaders of the community, but leaders of nonprofits, leaders of businesses in the city, and those kinds of things. And so it really was the beginning of a visioning process that we have to continue. We're not going to this committee is not going to just sit back and not do anything. I think that we will be involved, and of course we work at the pleasure of the council, but those agendas are going to continue to involve visioning and conversation that go beyond just what you have assigned us as a committee. And so I would just end by saying, that if I might just personally say, one of the things that we have to understand as leaders of a community, as elected officials, is that we have to listen to all voices. That we cannot lead a community if we're unwilling to listen even to those folks that we disagree with. We need to be able to listen. And I think that, and it's been my philosophy from the beginning, that the committees of this council are really the workhorse. This really is where we need to be doing that ground floor, grassroots, looking for information, digging up what is it that we want to do? What are we about as a council? Starts with the committees. That's my report. Thank you.
Councilor Entenmann.
Councilor Erpenbach, I have one question. One thing I would ask, I noticed when he was giving the presentation about some of the ordinances that already exist, how they're going back on some of these ordinances for a long period of time, and he mentioned some of the timelines they have involving some of the citizen committees. While I do agree with you that we do need to listen, I think we need to be a little bit more, I think the council needs to be a little bit more pointed in what our expectations are. In other words, we can't allow some of these discussions and these committees to stretch on for 2 or 3 years because there's a lot of dialogue. I think in a way that there is a little bit of a sense of urgency that we need to look. These ordinances haven't been redefined or looked at for 30 years plus. I think we need to be a little bit more expeditious in our approach to this and put some timelines on these groups. Otherwise, I think the tendency would be to continue to put these out a little further and further. Not everybody's going to agree on things 100%. I think we all know that. But I think we owe it to the rest of the citizens to look at this a little bit tighter and look at timelines a little bit more than allowing the approach of the shotgun scattergun approach. Well, we'll be to use sometime in the future with that. I think these things are so important that I think that we do need to be a little bit more pointed in what our expectations are of some of these committees.
If I might respond to that, because I have a personal response to that as well. I was, as a member of the council and as a citizen, and we talked about it just briefly last Monday on the landscape portion of that zoning ordinance. And we talked about everything from how many trees to plant around a parking lot to whether a homeowner can put flowers in their boulevard along the street. But we met 6 or 8 times. And now that thing is a package. The landscape part of it is this package that's sitting out there waiting for the parking group and the sign group and the whoever else group to come together to bring that whole zoning package together. But you're right. We are kind of being strung along in that they are not ancient, but they're really old ordinances. There's a lot of stuff there that doesn't apply anymore.
A prime example are the ordinances that we're dealing with today at second reading. I think that's a prime example of what we're talking about here.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, when we're talking about the RV parking and the
signage.
The signage
Vehicle
on
signage.
vehicles. Absolutely. So I think your point is well taken, Councilor Anderson. I think that we really do as council members, and I told Jeff Schmidt that we are going to see you more often. We're going to hear you bring us updates. Well, maybe that's the next question we need to ask is when? Really when? Not down the road when, but give us a date.
Yep.
I think
I
you're
think
right.
we're in the driver's seat on these, and I think we got to make sure that we continue to
Yeah, I think you're
be
right.
proactive in this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilor Rolfing.
I'd like to thank and tell everybody that I agree with what Councilor Erpenbach has said. I think the process needs to be open as much as possible. And while I commend what the chairman did for the Land Use Committee, I would also urge that when a process is already in place for public input on a project, that we then stay within that process, especially on a program that is as big as the one that was being talked about. And so that's why what happened last week happened. I love the idea of what she is doing with bringing people in and expanding the process and the outlook of what the Land Use Committee is doing. I think that's fantastic. I love that idea and support her 100% on that. So thank you.
Councilor Anderson.
To add on to what Councilman Edelman was also saying is with these ordinances also, some of these newer ordinances, I still feel that they're not looking at the differences between some of our newer sections of the city and our old sections. And we have to continually look at that to make sure that our older neighborhoods are falling under a little bit different modification on some of these ordinances, because these lots and some of these areas were built very uniquely, and we have to continually look at that too.
Any other comments or questions about land use? I have a couple. I sat, in fact, all of us except Councilor Brown sat through that committee meeting. Councilor Brown was absent. Even our old friend Councilor Litz was here, and he serves on that committee, but no longer does. It was quite a long meeting, and we sat through it, I think, with the interest of hearing a lot of things. A lot of good things happened at that meeting, but it ended on a bad note. And I think it's something we either need to recognize right now, that it either ended on a bad note or it ended as we all wanted it to end. And so I'm asking the question, I guess, and how is it that we want to determine who does present to our committees and who doesn't? Because we can't have this unknown surfacing out there. Either we know who's going to and why or and how and what the parameters are that allow somebody to present to us in a committee setting, so that those people who are applying to communicate with us know those parameters and will either fall within them or not. And this group will certainly show the leadership that here's who is allowable and who is not. I would caution that if anybody is not allowed to communicate to the council, anybody, whether they're for RV parking or against RV parking, if they're for snow gates or against snow gates, red light cameras or no cameras, that we will fail sometime down the road if we do not allow everybody a chance to be heard. So I wanted to start the discussion at least in determining exactly who can present and who cannot. All right. Councilor Entman.
Question, Greg, Councilor Jameson, excuse me.
I go by Greg, but
Yeah, I know you do. So are we talking about whether we formalize the procedure a little bit more, where we have to have an agenda, we vote on and approve an agenda, and we run that way? Or talking a little bit about trying to keep the process the way we have, a little bit looser, allowing for additional input, and the chair being permitted to set the agenda? Is that kind of what you're asking, Greg?
kind of all those things. I'd sure caution us not to get too formal, but the parameter is how do we avoid having what happened happen again? So if it takes getting more formal action, then I guess.
But we do have to maintain control, though, and we can't just have an open agenda here, right? I mean, I just would hate to see that in the sense of order.
Okay. Councilor Aguilar.
Well, I guess that I've always seen the past practice to be that the chair develops the agenda and the agenda goes out prior to Friday of the previous week. And that's what happened in this instance. And then I would say that it would be up to members of the committee, if there is a problem with the agenda, that under professional courtesy, that they would have that conversation with the chair. I have to respectfully disagree with Councilor Rolfing's comments that if the process is in place, that we stick with the process. In this instance, I believe that we have given the administration the opportunity to present at one informational a month, but I don't think that that means that we stop discussion with the public. And actually, I see committee meetings as the place where good debate can take place, in that the administration was aware that this was on the agenda, and there were representatives of the administration that could have gotten up, and if they had heard something that they disagreed with, they could have brought that forward. And that, again, goes back to the grassroots part of what we are supposed to be doing, listening to our constituents. And I see that the committee is the place that that can be done.
I will say,
Councilor Entman.
if I might, I will say, and I'll be honest with the citizens out there that might be listening to this, it is really, really a challenge as a part of a counselor who has been involved in private business for a long time, who has been involved in a number of different organizations, where we're so used to being able to go behind a closed door, come out and make a decision and run with that and do it in a short period of time. I must tell the citizens of Sioux Falls, the process I do believe that the City Council and we in government have to follow is a very good process. And it does protect the citizens and gives them a lot of time for the input. And I really do think that that's very key. But for those of us that are trying to change a little bit, it makes, they say you can't teach an old dog new tricks. Well, I think you can. You just got to hit him a little harder, that's all. And it is working. And it is challenging. But I think the process itself is very good, and it's a slower process than some of us that are involved in business are really familiar with, and it's hard to do that. I do like the process. I'd like to keep it a little bit less formal than where we have to approve an agenda the way that we've carried on in the past. I think all of us that serve on committees and the chairs of the committees owe it to each other to make sure that they have some dialogue with their committee members. And I think that we would be, and I think the citizens would be well served by that process.
Any other input or thoughts? Yes, City Clerk.
Thank you. I was just going to remind also there's a couple of mechanisms that committee agendas are built. Obviously, the regular agenda for council final action at the 7 o'clock City Council meeting is done primarily by ordinance. But there are some items that can have its first reading at a City Council meeting, and that becomes an item that the council may want to hear again. So that could be referred to a committee, and the council votes on that. And so there's not a rule on that. It's just an action that you can take. And then, two, sometimes in informational meetings like this one, issues can be assigned to a committee. And I think the special request audit requested by Councilmember Anderson Jr. Started that way and will be in committee, but it's been assigned to that committee from an informational. So just wanted to remind those other two mechanisms of getting things on the agenda for committee meetings. Thanks.
Councilor Aguilar.
There is one other thing I'd like to say. I would like to see us revise the ordinances so that we follow Robert's rules. I really don't see reasoning behind where we have certain ordinances. I don't think as council members we can be expected to know when we're not using Robert's rules. It was very confusing last week.
Councilor Intiman.
Would that be something then that we would have the city attorney and Deborah's off and the clerks help and kind of get that straightened out or come up with some recommendations that we might do here?
Yeah, pardon, Deborah, we probably could, but also I'd want to put that through a committee, like Public Services, or a committee to take a look at and review, since you're the ones who have the rules really apply to you. But we are kind of reviewing and updating a lot of the items in Chapter 2 because we have, it's kind of housekeeping. We do a lot of things electronically as opposed to hard copy. So internally, the clerk's office has been working on some of those ordinances to bring to a committee or to be assigned to a committee down the road. But I think there might have, I actually agree with Councilmember Aguilar. Of course, the vote is up to you on those. But there are some issues where we don't use Roberts, and I don't know why that is. I don't know why those rules were. Roberts is obviously it covers it all. So,
Councilor Aguilar.
Are there other places that have been defined in ordinance that don't follow Roberts?
Deborah Owen, and certainly there are. There's only one where the motion to reconsider, I think, works really well with city code because of our meetings with council. That's the one I would ask you to consider keeping in place. There is a provision that allows the presiding officer to enter into debate, which, of course, in Roberts, the presiding officer really abstains from debate and it does not enter. But they can enter, and they just give up the gavel, and then they can advocate for whatever issue that is important to them. And that's a curiosity, too, to me. Usually you have the presiding officer, which is a position of power in terms of any committee or governing body, and that could be with a committee meeting as well as a 7 o'clock meeting. That is a rule that I don't quite understand either. So.
Councilor Erpenbach.
If I might, just the biggest backlash that I had based on last week was about Robert's rules. And it's hard for citizens to be watching. There are, many citizens that watch us religiously, and they didn't understand what that was about because it did conflict with Robert's rules. And if we can make it, again, it goes to transparency. It goes to helping people understand government. I'd really be in favor of us moving toward that, too.
I'm not sure of the agendas for all the committees, but I would sure take that leadership from Councilor Aguilar to assign this to a committee and the city clerk to assign this to a committee. Is there a committee that has got a schedule that's open, that's willing to public services? I think I may maybe say if I were subliminally saying public services. Councilor Anderson?
We can take it on. We are still the hardest working committee out there.
Nice. Well, I'd like to bring this discussion back to maybe a couple pointed questions that I asked, and I don't think we've gotten to there yet. For our committee meetings, what is our process for determining who and who cannot present? What do we want to decide right here, right now, who is in and who is out? Is there ever a chance that that is to be decided? Councilor Brown.
The practice has always been that it's open. Every time during fiscal committee, throughout my time on it, we've always said, are there others in the audience that want to speak to an issue? The day that we stop listening to groups coming to us is the day that we're going to put this city in jeopardy. So I would encourage us, the committee is the perfect place to do it because we don't generally have the time limitations. Sure, we allow public input at the 7 o'clock meetings, but 5 minutes is not time to get in depth. And the chair always has the gavel. If it's inappropriate, you can gavel it down. So I would encourage us to allow that. Frankly, that committee was, that group was courteous enough to come and ask to be a part of that meeting, so it was on the agenda. It could have happened at any other committee meeting, and the chair probably would have allowed it if they hadn't been already on the agenda.
Councilor Anderson?
I still believe that the process does work. I think that these are public meetings, and we need to leave them open.
Committee meetings.
They are meetings.
Well, one of the hot topics about the discussions we have in our community certainly is the event center, where it should be and how much we should spend on it. And that's I think the exciting part about our committees is that we can analyze any discussion. It's going to be a serious discussion in our community to have all thoughts and all sides ferreted out in a committee meeting. Now, certainly moving into this room, we've probably intimidated some public from coming forward because it just is, just the way it is. But for our services, it works best for us to use this room and the recording and the cameras and the mics in order so everybody can hear what's happening. We've decided to be in this room, but well, as our process goes forward, I think we have an agenda approval process in place where the chair is setting it and sends it out to the members prior to the meeting. And if any of the members have a problem with the agenda, they'll either work it out with the chair or find an alternative solution. The second would be then regarding is during the committee meetings. Our diplomacy and our process for moving through the agenda, as it's been done over the years, is probably fair to keep in place. But no formal, I have enough problem with Robert's rules myself. So I don't need any more, but that's my take. But we do need to hold it together. And just know this, I would say, that in any case, if the chair is in a situation where the meeting is moving in a fashion that is out of their knowledge of Robert's rules, slow down, take the time and confer with the city clerk at the meeting. The clerks know all the rules. They'll help you and guide you, and then they'll clarify issues with other counselors who may be asking a question at hand. Use the clerks. They're there to help us with those meetings, and they'll make sure everything gets done in an orderly fashion. So I don't want to hammer this thing too much, but I wanted to bring some light to it so that we at least regain control, understand the process and why we go through it the way we do. And there was a discussion, a question brought up whether or not this whole event center issue is a little too electric. The way it's been, I think as Councilor Rolfing might have even mentioned, it was a politically charged or charged issue, and it truly is. And so the question was whether or not we should actually send that through one of the committees. So when the mayor comes and presents his updates during the 4 o'clock informational, perhaps that should all unfold in a committee so that the citizens who are out here have an opportunity to participate in the discussion. So far, they have not. Now, the last task force certainly spent a lot of time talking to the public and having focus groups and things, but in this process, now this is just an idea that was brought up, whether or not that should go back to a committee and listen and involve the public. Just an idea to bring up and for us to maybe talk about and think about, because in all fairness, in this whole discussion, we've sat here as a group and have listened to all the presentations by the administration and the hired consultants about what their findings are and their thoughts. But along this whole path, we've not included the public. In this process, at least this current administration, we've not included the public. It just seems like an odd structure for us. It feels a little out of control, maybe. It feels a little awkward that we aren't having the same kind of discussions regarding such a big investment, such a big topic of discussion in our community, that it is just going a little different than most others have done. Just conversation amongst us to figure out how we maybe want to move forward if there is a change of course that we would want. We have the authority to do that. We have the responsibility to do what we think is best. So we need to make sure we exercise that responsibility. Councilor Rolfing.
Thank you, Councilor Jameson. I seem to be somewhat in the minority around here, and that's okay. I've done that before. But I'm really not, because I think we're all more on the same page than what we'd like to believe. In response to what your last comment was, Councilor Jameson, the system is built for public input. There is going to be, the way I remember it, there is going to be plenty of time for public input when all the information is received. One of my objections, and one of the reasons I did not think it was appropriate last week, is that, and I looked through the information that was there, it was all 2005 information. Why shouldn't we have information that's going to be current? We know the information on 2005. And so that was one of the reasons that I thought we should be waiting for this, when both sides or the sides, when we get the information that is current, that is being studied right now as we speak. This information that the downtown, Build It Downtown side people want so desperately to have is being compilated right now. Let's wait for it so that they have something to really present that is new and different. I'm not here to stifle public input. Absolutely not. That was not my purpose in that. I just want, the system has been set. We voted on a system as a unit. We gave them the money to do that as a council. We agreed to it. And so I think we need to follow that. We need to look at that. But again, I don't want to stifle people coming here before us. That's not my purpose. But we've heard it all before. I want to apologize to the Build It Downtown group. I'm sorry that they came here and that they did not get to present. But again, I did not think it was an appropriate place to hear the same information again. And that's why I did what I did. The system, we just need to let the system, we told the mayor, one of the first times that we talked to him was, settle down, slow down, let the system work. And I'm going to urge you guys to do the same thing with this particular area. Slow down, settle down, let the system work. When we get the information, now we got the place for the public input, guys. Then it'll work. That was my purpose. Thank you.
With all due respect, Councilor Rolfing, you did not receive the presentation from the downtown group until you had made your motion. Unless you had received that information from the Build It Downtown group that it was a 2005 old information prior to the meeting starting, you did not have that information prior to your motion. So the idea that you just explained, I'm sorry, I just have to call you out on that is not true and fair.
You're absolutely right. But was there any other information in there that wasn't from 2005?
Actually, I haven't reviewed it.
I have. There was not. Thank you.
Councilor Brown.
I'm fine, thanks.
Councilor Erpenbach.
I want to go back to your original question about how we want to set up committees and what we expect from them and how we want them to work. The other thing that the conversation we had prior to the Land Use Committee was again from our trip to Savannah, and one of the things that I said a couple of different times was that we need to not focus so much on the crisis. And so I would extrapolate that then to say that we also need to not focus quite so much on the event center, that we need to continue to vision down the road. And I said it kind of in jest, but I said to someone earlier this week that the name is Build It Downtown. It's implied that it's the event center, but build what? What are the possibilities and what are the imaginings of these folks? And that was the opportunity that we missed in that idea that, yeah, the information right now is from 2005, but what do we imagine Sioux Falls to be, and what do we imagine downtown to be? Beyond, I understand the event center is a $100 million project, it's huge, but we are going to continue to be Sioux Falls, and we're going to continue to grow and change and be whatever we want to be beyond the event center conversation, and I want that to go forward beyond just the event center. And I think we need to let these committees be that way, and we need to let the chairs kind of set that conversation. Let's be about being open-minded and be about those strong conversations in the committee meetings.
Councilor Entman.
Over the years, I've been involved in a couple of different task forces, and we have spent a lot of time, Greg, to answer your concern about public input in here. We have spent a lot of time in both task forces going out to the public and asking questions, and I think the committee people that were involved need to be commended because they did a very, very good job. Now, as any group, with the information that we get, conclusions have to be drawn, and it was the charge of both task forces to come up with some conclusions concerning the event center, where it might be located, existing facilities, in case of the first task force identifying public need. All of these kinds of things were part of the discussion along the process. Being a person that has been involved in and I think we had this discussion earlier, I know Councilman Brown and myself, we've talked about it before too, and I've talked with a number of other people about it. We have studied the thing, and we've gotten a lot of public input. And no matter what you say and how much more input you're going to get, you're going to probably get a lot more of the same until we identify what the facility is actually going to look like, the amenities, and we made recommendations on our committees as far as what amenities should be in these things. We spent a lot of time with consultants, a lot of time with the user groups trying to identify what should be in there. We did appropriate the money, and now it's the mayor's challenge, which he's doing with the respective people that have been hired to do it, to get us some answers. What's it going to look like? What is the actual seating that's going to be proposed? What's it going to look like in positioning on the lot? All of these different things that the professionals have to do. He also promised us that once that we had that information, he was going to take it to the public and get public input on it. And it's my understanding that he still plans on doing that. And I am still going to insist that we take that information out and give everybody a chance to comment on it. But at the end of the day, no matter how many people comment on it, somebody's got to make a decision, and somebody has to go forward with it. The whole process we have, ultimately, I think is going to be great. Once these parameters are all defined, once we come up with an idea, we have an idea on how it's going to be financed, all of these things, the people of Sioux Falls are ultimately going to have the final vote on whether or not we're going to finance building an event center. So I think the process has been good. He's promised an economic impact study. He's promised a development impact study, all of which I believe, if they're not being worked on now, will be worked on shortly. I personally am excited by the process. We need to go forward with it. We have studied it for a number of different years under several different task forces involving lots of different people from throughout the community, all sectors of the community. Special needs people, different economic classes, all of those people have been involved in this process over the past, since the 2005 task force that I was involved in the first one. So I'm excited by the process that we have. I think it's going to play out. You can bet I'm going to have an awful lot of questions as these people are standing up in front of us, presenting to us. And I would hope that all of us are going to have questions, and I plan on attending as many public forums as possible once the mayor and the group take this out to the public. So again, I'm excited by it. I think we need to let it play out a little bit with what's happening. And we need to ask those questions at the public information meeting. I think that's an appropriate venue to bring this up at our council information meetings. He asked to be able to do that, and we gave him permission to do that. I think that's where it needs to be. I don't know that it needs to go to a council committee right now. I believe we need to put it to the public, and everything's got to be laid out there as we go forward. And I think we got a good process started, and I'm here to say that we need to continue that process. Thank you.
I would just add a little follow-up that one perspective that you might consider is the enormous amount of time that you've spent on this topic is not the same as most citizens have.
I understand.
Your understanding and conception and the whole process at hand is completely probably like the back of your hand. But there's a lot of people out there asking about this process who did not participate in the previous studies and are asking questions along the way as we move forward. And I don't think that they're completely interested in waiting until the process is done about where it's going to be and how big it's going to be, only to have it presented to them later. I get a lot of people asking me about this. You know, they're not going to just sit and wait, or it doesn't appear that they're comfortable sitting and waiting for the whole picture to be painted and asked if they like it or not. There's a process involved in including the public through the discussion to say, do you like this? Do you like where we're headed? Do you like how we're doing this? And get them to buy into it along the process. I think we would have a much smoother road and a collaborative effort with the public. And that's part of the process I'd like to see change, and that's how I'd like to bring more of the public involvement in this discussion so it doesn't turn into, do you like it or not? And that's really all it's going to be for the public to decide. And I just think we could have more involvement from the public and more ownership in the project, more belief in the project than the way that it's going. But you've shared your opinion about, you know, not sending it to a committee, and I would like to hear from the rest of the group if the process at hand is how you'd like it to continue, and if different, we should change it. Councilor Henchman.
If I could have one more comment. You know, I do believe that a lot of us campaigned on the event center and what it was that we wanted to see and what we thought the process should be. And I was very vocal during the time period that I did that and during that election. And I do believe the citizens of this community, they do want to be involved, but like everybody else, you know, they have lives and businesses and everything to be involved in. We're fortunate that those of us that are in city government or that have been elected, you know, and I've made this statement a number of different times. I don't believe that anybody should question elected officials' integrity. It's been my experience in dealing with all of these council people here and with the mayor's office. Their integrity is great. At the end of the day, we all want to be at the same spot in the city of Sioux Falls, and that's to have a progressive, good community that we all want to live in. We just all have different ideas on how we're going to get there. We have a different roadmap, all of us do. But at the end of the day, I think we're all going to be there. But I do believe the citizens in Sioux Falls elected us to make some decisions and to be as informed as we possibly can be with the time that we have involved. And as such, I believe that we can involve and ask people, Greg, but you ask 50,000 people a question, there's going to be 50,000 different answers there. And I think at the end of the day, they want to know, okay, we've talked about it, we've discussed it. Again, you know, there's been great opportunities. Public forums have been held all over the city, invitations sent out to people to participate in those forums. Those that did, we got a lot of information from those during the task force presentations. But again, I believe I'm very satisfied with the way it's playing out. Some final decisions are made on what it's going to look at. We take it to the public. We get some input. It's my idea that it's my understanding there's going to be some opportunity to possibly do some tweaks. But once we get that, but it's got to all be presented in some orderly fashion. And I think that as long as we are good stewards of the process as it's been laid out, I think it's going to be a good process, and I think it's going to serve the people well. Good. Thanks.
Okay, well, I guess without seeing any other comments or desires to change the process as it is in place, we will continue with that unless we see fit to change it some other time. Councilor Anderson? Councilor Aguilar?
I do have a question then. Are you just talking about the mayor's presentation? That stay at the informational? That does not stop the council or any committee from having any group that would like to go forward? That would still be up to the committee to make that decision. Is that correct?
Right. My discussion was to see if we wanted to move the event center to a committee, essentially. But any other committee that feels the chair feels necessary to invite a group or to listen to a group would certainly be up to that committee and that chair. But the question of moving the event center to a committee was the question at hand, and not seeing any favorable support for that. We'll keep it on track as it's been laid out.
Mr. Jameson?
Councilor Anderson.
Last thing on this I want to say is, I guess one of the reasons I would like to see it stay at the informational level is because at this time, none of our committee meetings are recorded visually. We recorded audibly, but not visually. So I think by leaving it at the informational level, more people get an opportunity to see exactly what we're doing. And as far as discussion, I don't understand where discussions ever hurt anything. So I hope that we will continue to discuss this. The process is in place. The process is moving forward. I don't see anything stopping that process. And that's gathering the information for a final result. But until then, I also do believe that an open, honest discussion about things that have already happened, you know, there's questions we can't answer right now because the process hasn't gone that far. But for those that we can answer and those parts of this discussion that we can discuss, I think we should still leave that open for the public to participate in.
I'll wrap up with just one comment. We'll move on to our open discussion. But through my 2.5 or nearly 3 years on the council, the one thing that I've learned in this whole process is that we make some decisions that rarely make everybody happy. We always make a group not happy with us. But I can tell you this, what I've learned is that there are people who only want to be heard. They know you're not going to make them happy. We're going to have that discussion later tonight on the RV parking ordinance. The biggest key is that they want to be heard. And I think that's what's missing. All right, we'll move on to our City Council open discussion. Any topics? Councilor Erpenbach.
I just wanted to follow up on something that I have notes on from last week's informational agenda, and maybe it's Councilor Anderson that brought it up, the Whittier Neighborhood Group that's tearing down the burned house and rebuilding it for the owner. Do we have follow-up on that yet?
That would be Councilman Jameson brought
Jameson,
that up.
I'm sorry.
We don't have a formal update, but the landfill issue was what was at hand, and the another contractor, Soak Up Construction, had actually volunteered to demolish or to remove all that rubbish and take it to their own landfill. So just a great effort by another contractor within our community who stepped forward to help and participate. So that project is just a wonderful example of neighbors coming together. So we'll get an update later, but as far as the city's involvement, they're working through stopping any zoning enforcement laws or code enforcement rules. There just a lot of great things the city is still doing, but forward and later on, we should evaluate the ordinance that, you know, gives us some authority to eliminate some of those fees, and that will come later. But as of right now, the issue has been solved and handled by Soak Up Construction.
Okay, good to know. I guess that was part of it. It was that I wanted to make sure that that was moving forward for those folks. And I would like us to reevaluate some of those things. I mean, we're not talking about breaking code enforcement rules, but we're talking about exactly what Councilor Anderson was talking about, that it's in one of those core neighborhoods where the lot is really small and we're going to build a new house there, and there are all kinds of different rules, and we have to be cognizant of those core areas, that the lots are different, and we have to sometimes bend things. The other thing, though, that I think would be fun personally is to do a before and after presentation. If we could see, I'm sure they're taking pictures, and if they could do kind of a report afterwards, it's a great story. And our whole community needs to hear this story and see that this amazing thing that's going on. I just appreciate you bringing it forward for us.
You know, there's just a neighbor who called me because he was on a weekend and he saw the phone numbers listed, and mine was the cell number, so he called me because he figured he could get me. So that's how I got picked. But I know KSFY is following this process from start to finish, so there's going to be quite a story on their news station about it. So I don't know if it's fair to bring up, but Councilor Erpenbach and Councilor Brown are going to be at a special place on Saturday. Would one of you like to tell us about that?
We'll be at what's now Hy-Vee, used to be Sunshine, at 10th and Kiwanis on Saturday for the Listen and Learn session, talking about the process and procedure for the council filling former Councilor Litz's seat, and any other topics that come up.
And it will be just hosted by you two, is that right?
Yes, but it's posted, right, Deborah? It'll be posted, so all are welcome. It'll be posted as that a quorum could be there. So the more the merrier. We welcome it. And that starts at 10 o'clock.
9 o'clock.
9 o'clock, thank you.
Don't show up at 10. Vern.
I'll show up at 10. She'll be there at 9.
That's what I see.
Any other, Councilor Entenmann?
There's a great basketball tournament going on. The Summit League tournament is going on right now.
Go
And
State!
Yeah, and I think I need to thank the Sioux Falls Sports Authority and all the people that are volunteering to help make this a huge success. This is the first year in the second contract, basically 2-year contract that we have, and I know the Sports Authority is looking forward to bidding for this again for the 2012 year, I believe, or 2013 and 14. So again, they're doing an excellent job. It's an excellent basketball tournament. I want to encourage people to go to it.
Councilor Anderson.
I did an interview with Kello the other day about the Coliseum. It showed last night at 10 o'clock and again this morning. But the one thing I really wanted to talk about on this was that getting some of our entities, the Pavilion, the Arena Convention Center, the Orpheum Theater, to be able to share some of those items that they have or borrow out, I think was a great ideal. That came from Terry Torgerson, the manager of the Arena, which allowed us to basically get the stage at the Coliseum certified and now available for use. And over the last weekend, the women's conference was able to use that staging. And I just wanted to thank the Arena and the mayor for realizing that being able to share and utilize equipment between our city entities is a good way to save money and keep good faith between the different entities.
Very good, and I think I saw, Councilor Anderson, you did the first recording of the new inside.
Yes,
hall. How did that go?
we did that on Thursday. Instead of just the 15-minute segment, we now have the full half an hour. We broke it up into 3 different segments. We talked about code enforcement and building services, and then the appeal process, and then the third part was talking about my district and different things that are happening in the district. I think it went very well. It allows you to have some time to really discuss and get information out to the public.
Very good. With all your exposure, maybe you're looking for an agent to handle all that PR work you're doing. All right. Very good, Kenny. Anything, Councilor Aguilar?
Yes. I'd like a point of personal privilege. Today is my mother's 80th birthday. Happy birthday, Mom.
Happy birthday.
Happy birthday. What a great note to end our council informational meeting on. If there's no other business, we'll move to adjourn. You're adjourned.